Dream Report 4.8 introduced the concept of a repository-based project configuration. Prior to version 4.8, all Dream Report project development was performed locally on the Dream Report PC or server, with all project configuration files being contained under the main project directory. Starting in Dream Report 4.8, project development can now be performed in two ways. Traditional or local project development, but now with the project's configuration completely contained in a single SQLite configuration database, which requires no installation or configuration on the user's part. The project configuration file will be named with the project name and a .drpj file extension. Repository-based project development, where a common project repository, also a SQLite configuration database file, is maintained on a Dream Report server, allowing for local or remote Dream Report developers to work with local copies of the project, based off the main project repository, lock objects for remote development, and hence prevent conflicts with other remote users, and maintain a complete configuration audit trail as reports and other project configuration tools are checked in or out of the main project repository. The project repository file will be named with the project name and a .drrepo or drrepo file extension. In both scenarios, the user starts by creating a new project in the Dream Report Studio. The workflow to implement a remote or concurrent project development is as follows. On the main Dream Report server, start Designer Studio and create a new project, or open an existing project. Once in Studio, enable concurrent development and specify connection settings to this repository server. Enable user management, and then a project repository file will be created, and Studio will reopen with a local working copy of the project. On any development nodes, start Studio, configure the remote settings required by the repository server, and then select the repository file on the server. Studio will open with a new local working copy of the project. Configure and edit your project from any development node, making sure to lock and unlock reports and modules, and commit to and update from the repository. If your Dream Report server will contain the repository file and run the project, simply run or reload the project from any node. The project will then start up on the repository server. However, if you have a separate production or runtime server, in Studio on the runtime server, specify the connection settings to that server. And then, on the repository server, specify the deployment settings to the runtime server, and then deploy the project. The production project will then run on the dedicated runtime node. We'll now go through all of these steps in detail. Once Dream Report Studio opens and the new project is created, you can start creating the project and reports. No additional or special configuration is needed to develop a project as you always have in Dream Report. Let's now talk about repository-based project development. As I discussed, the two main reasons to use a Dream Report project repository are version control. Even if a remote or concurrent report development is not being used, a repository-based project allows for project version control. The second reason to use repository-based project development is for remote or concurrent or multi-developer project development. After creating a new project, as I just described, to enable and implement a repository-based Dream Report project, we do the following in Dream Report Studio. On the left side Quick Launch toolbar, click the Remote Development Configuration icon. The following Remote Development Configuration window will open. On the Server tab, I'll check the option to enable connections to this project for concurrent development. For the server settings, that is, the settings that remote development nodes will need to use to connect to this repository node, I'll enter a remote access code, much like a numeric PIN code or an alphanumeric string. The communication protocol to use, which is either HTTP or HTTPS, and the port number through which to communicate with the Dream Report repository. The remote access code should be a unique code known to all Dream Report developers that they will enter when connecting to the remote repository. If this node is a Dream Report development client, the Settings on the Client tab allow the user to modify how the local working copy of the project will connect to the repository node. Changes here are only needed if remote development configuration settings are changed on the repository node or server. After the Enable Connections to this project has been checked on the Server tab, I'll click OK. I'll then be prompted to restart Studio with the new settings. After I click Yes, Studio will automatically close and then reopen. If user management was enabled, which we'll cover in the following section, the user will be prompted to log in before Studio reopens. At this point, a local working copy of the newly created project repository is what gets opened and edited in Studio. Let's now talk about user management with repository-based project development. It's highly recommended to use user management, also known as project security, with a repository-based project. Even if the remote or concurrent project development is not being performed, user management in a repository-based project will facilitate version control in that all changes will be tracked and attributed to the specific user logged into Dream Report Studio. For remote or concurrent project development, user management ensures that reports and project modules can be locked and unlocked by specific users. If using remote development in a terminal services environment, user management must be used, and each report developer must log into Studio with a different user account. To enable user management, I'll go to the Project Settings, go to the General tab, and then click the User Authentication option. Next, I'll click the Define Users button to add users. Once I've added and configured my developers, then I'll give each of those users project development authorization by giving access to Designer Studio and access to data configuration, or simply give them full administrator rights. The user management section of the help documentation goes into more detail on setting up users and granting authorization. I'll make sure to save the project by clicking on the Dream Report icon in the top left of Studio and clicking Save Project, or by clicking the Save Project icon. I'll be prompted to either save only the local working copy of the project, or both the local copy and the remote or repository file as well. Please note, make sure to select the second option to ensure that all remote users will have access to the latest changes in the project. The Commit to Repository window will then open. Here I'll select all the reports and modules to commit, add a user comment describing the commit, and then click OK. We'll go into more detail later on committing to a repository. Before we move on, another quick but important note. If user management is enabled on the project, don't forget to give all or specific users access to each report, as new reports are created in the project. If this step is missed, reports will not appear in the Runtime Management Console or in the web portal for users to open or generate. Okay, now let's see how a remote developer connects to a project repository. Before we get started, a quick note on licensing. If you're opening Dream Report Studio on a remote development station, you likely won't have or need a Dream Report license on that machine. All Dream Report licenses, tag-based runtime licenses, and optional remote development licenses are installed on the Dream Report server. As such, when you open Studio on a node without a license, the following Evaluate or Register warning might first pop up. You can go ahead and click Evaluate, as this will allow you to open Studio, connect to a repository node, and perform remote development, assuming a remote development license is available for this client. The only limitation is that you'll not be able to run and test the project locally, as no runtime license is present. To use Dream Report Studio on a computer remote from the Dream Report repository or runtime machine, we start Studio by clicking the Dream Report Studio icon on the desktop. After Studio opens, if this is the first time connecting to a remote repository-based project, we'll go ahead and follow these steps. On the Open Project window, I'll click the Remote Project icon, and then click the Remote Project Settings button. I'll need to enter the following connection settings, which were defined and required on the remote repository project, which I showed earlier in this video tutorial. First, we'll set the remote access code. Here we enter the specific code that Dream Report clients will need when connecting to the Dream Report repository node. For the protocol, again select either HTTP or HTTPS to match the main node. Host, I'll enter or browse for the computer name or IP address of the repository node. For the port, we'll use the port through which Dream Report will communicate with the repository node. You'll need to make sure that this port is opened if working through a firewall. Note that if this is a Dream Report engineering workstation that's used for development of multiple remote repositories, you can click the Recent URL button, which will display a list of previously configured repository connections. I'll click the Test Connection button. If successful, the message Test Connection Succeeded will pop up. If not successful, the warning message Test Connection Failed. If that is the case, The first thing to check is that you can ping the repository node and that the firewall, if being used, has the specified port open. Also make sure you're using the correct access code. Next, I'll select the Dream Report repository file on the remote Dream Report repository node by performing one of the following. As a quick start, you can click the Repository Path from Running Project button. This will check if a project is actively running on the repository node, and if so, will automatically point to that repository file. Or, I can click on the drop-down list to select a previously used remote repository file. Or finally, I can click on the Browse button to browse for the repository file on the remote repository node. This won't browse on the local computer. The repository file will typically be located in ods/dreamreport/project/your project name directory with a file extension of .dr repo. Finally, the local folder will be the directory on the local or development node where the working copy of the project will reside. By default, Dream Report will create a remote folder under the local project directory, under which all local working copies of the project will be located. I'm going to click the Connect and Check Out button to create a local copy of the project. If successful, and if user management or security was not enabled on the repository node, then Studio will restart automatically with a local working copy of the project. If user management was enabled, I'll be prompted twice to log in. Once to first accept the changes to connect to the remote repository, and then again when Dream Report Studio automatically restarts with a local working copy of the project. Now that a local working copy of the project has been created, each time you open Dream Report Studio, you don't need to go through this procedure again to configure the connection to the remote project. Rather, on the Open Project window, you simply need to click the Open Existing Project icon, select the Remote Project option, and then select that local working copy of the project. The most recent will always be the default. Also notice now in Studio that a new Remote Development tab will appear in the menu bar. We'll use the features here shortly. Now let's talk about locking and unlocking and committing and updating a project repository. There's two important concepts to understand and follow with remote concurrent development: locking and unlocking reports and project modules, and then committing to and updating from the project repository. Let's start off by understanding how to lock and unlock reports and project modules. Before editing any report or editing any configuration module in Studio, it's important to lock that report or module, thereby preventing any other user or users editing the same report or module, and hence preventing potential configuration conflicts or overwrites. To lock a report, either right-click on the report and select Lock Report, or from the Remote Development menu, click the Lock/Unlock Reports icon, and the following Lock/Unlock Reports window will open, from which you can selectively lock individual reports or all reports. Note that if project user management is being used, the user who locked the report or reports will appear under the Lock State column. I'll click OK to close the Lock/Unlock Reports window. In Designer Studio, notice in the list of reports on the left-hand side, those reports locked by the current user will appear with a blue dot in the report icon. Once you've locked your report, go ahead and edit the report as needed. If you wish to reload reports for testing purposes, you do not yet need to unlock the report. You might want to leave it locked until all changes are finalized. Let's jump over to another development studio. If a user opens the Project Studio from another remote development station, any reports currently locked by other user or users will appear with a red dot in the report icon under the list of reports. Additionally, if any externally locked report is selected, the report will appear with a warning watermark and will be shown with diagonal crosshatch lines. The content of the report will not be able to be edited. Back on the Development Studio node, where the report is locked, once all the configuration changes are completed on the locked reports, I'll need to take the following steps to update the central project repository and unlock the report or reports. First, I'll save the reports by clicking on the Save Project icon. I'll be prompted to save only the local working copy of the project, or both the local copy and commit to the repository. I'll select the second option, Save and Commit, which will take care of both steps in one. When the Commit to Repository window opens, I'll select the report or reports I want to commit to the project repository, and then enter a user comment before clicking OK. The user comment should be something meaningful, as that can be referenced later on with version control. Finally, if you're ready to unlock the report so that other developers can work on them, either right-click on the report and select Unlock Report, or from the Remote Development menu, click the Lock Unlock Reports icon. When the Lock Unlock Reports window opens, you can selectively unlock individual reports or all reports by unchecking them. The Force Unlock button allows a super user or administrator to override the unlock state of a report. Note that you can only unlock reports that you specifically have locked. If you attempt to close Studio with one or more reports or project modules left locked, the following pop-up will be displayed, where you can either leave the report or modules locked or unlock them before exiting. Modules in Dream Report Studio are tools and functions other than reports that can and should be locked during configuration. These modules include everything from the Communication Driver Manager to batch definitions, the DSN Manager, data models, aggregated data filters, etc. Modules are locked in much the same way that reports are locked. From the Remote Development menu, you click the Lock Unlock Module icon, and the following Lock Unlock window will open, from which you can selectively lock individual modules. Note that locking certain modules will automatically lock other associated modules. Let me switch over to another development node. If I attempt to open or edit a module that is already locked by another user, the following warning window will appear. As I mentioned earlier, it's important to update from repository whenever opening Studio, or periodically update if others are actively working on the same project. This ensures that your local working copy of the project has all the latest report and module updates reflected in it. To do this, we go to the Remote Development tab and click on the Update from Repository option. You'll see here that there are two existing reports that need to be updated. The update operation shows a code of M, which means modified, and A would mean that the report has been added. That is, a new report was created. I'll click OK, and Studio will reopen the local working copy of the project with the updates applied. Notice the different background color now on the batch report, and the reformatted header on the pie charts report. Now on this Remote Development node, I'll quickly create a new report and apply an existing report template. Let me save the project, and again I'll be prompted to save the changes to both the local working copy as well as committing the changes to the remote repository, which I'll do now. Let me add a comment, and then I'll click OK. I'll switch over to my development VM where Studio was already open. You'll notice that the new pump station report is not shown. To apply the changes to the working copy, I again need to go to the Remote Development tab and click Update from Repository. Here we see the new report with an A or add update operation. Once I perform the update and Studio auto restarts, we see the new pump report in the local working copy. One thing I did do, but didn't show in this video, was go into the properties of each report and specify the users who have access to those reports at runtime. This is an important step that must be followed when using user management in a project. Let's now take a look at running a repository-based Dream Report project. To run or reload a repository-based project, simply use the Run Project, Reload Project, or Reload Reports icon from the Quick Launch toolbar, just as you would with a traditional or single-node Dream Report installation. Regardless if the run action is taken from the Dream Report Studio running on the repository node or from a remote development station, the repository will be started on the repository node. When the Runtime Management Console starts, you'll need to log in if user management is enabled. Notice that the repository file is loaded into Runtime. Here in the Runtime Management Console, we see that the DR repo project file is loaded, and also that the node name or IP address or localhost will be displayed, indicating where the project is actually running. As always, using the Dream Report Runtime Management Console, you can then generate and test your reports. Let's now discuss the remote project deployment architecture. In certain scenarios, you might have a testbed or a sandbox server on which to host a project repository, perform development, and run a test copy of the project. But you might wish to then deploy and run the actual Dream Report project on a separate, dedicated production or runtime server. The sole purpose of this server could be to run the Dream Report project and not for any project or report development. The system architecture might look as follows. In this scenario, Dream Report developers at Plant 1 and Plant 2, for instance, work locally to develop reports based on a Dream Report project maintained on a repository server, which I've named here Development. When all reports have been tested on the repository server, using the procedures outlined throughout this video tutorial, the project can then be deployed to a runtime or a production server using the Remote Project Deployment feature found on the Remote Development toolbar. There are two parts to configuring a remote deployment: on the runtime or production station, and then on the development or repository station. So let's first take a look at the runtime or production node. On the Dream Report runtime or production node, you need to perform the following tasks to allow for a runtime project to be deployed to that node and to allow for the running of and auto update of the project. Immediately after installing Dream Report on the production node, and prior to any project being deployed to that node, start Dream Report Studio and create a new local project. The project name is really unimportant here. We just need to get into Studio. When Studio opens on the production node, I need to click the Remote Development Configuration icon, just as we did earlier on. When the following Remote Development Configuration window opens, on the Server tab, do not check the option to enable connections to this project for concurrent development. However, for the server settings, which are the settings that the development or deployment node will need to use to connect to this runtime or production node, I'll enter a remote access code, which does not need to be the same code that the remote development nodes use to connect to the repository server. Enter in the communication protocol to use and the port number through which to communicate with this Dream Report runtime node. The remote access code should be unique code that's entered by the administrator when configuring the remote project deployment, which we'll look at next. Finally, on the production server, I'll save and close Studio. Now let's go back to Dream Report Studio on the development node. Here, on the Remote Development menu, I'll click the Remote Project Deployment icon, and the following Deploy Project window will open. These settings determine how the development or repository node will connect to the Dream Report runtime or production node. Basically, they need to match what was just set up a few minutes ago on the production server. For the protocol again, either use HTTP or HTTPS, the port through which the Dream Report development station will communicate with the runtime node. For the set remote access code, here I'll enter the specific code that the Dream Report repository node will need when connecting to the Dream Report production node. Host, here I'll enter the computer name or IP address of the production node. And for the location of repository folder, after clicking the Test Connection button, I'll browse for the directory on the Dream Report production node to which the runtime repository file will be copied. After configuring the Deploy Project window, I'll click OK, and the following pop-up window will appear. If this is the first time the project is being deployed to a remote runtime server, the only selection available will be to deploy the complete project and all reports, and the project will be deployed or copied to the specified folder on the runtime node. If changes have been made to the repository project and you wish to selectively update the production project with specific reports and/or modules, you can go ahead and select specific modules and reports. If the project is currently running on the runtime or production node, the changes will be applied and the project will reload automatically. If the project is not currently running on the runtime or production node, the following one-time procedure must be followed. Start Dream Report Studio on the runtime or production node and click the Open Existing Project option to open the just deployed project file from the deployment directory. Notice that when you select this project file, Remote is automatically selected. After the project opens in Studio, select the Runtime tab from the menu bar. I'll click the Runtime Configuration icon to set the runtime options. I'll make sure to start the current deployed project automatically when runtime starts, setting runtime to run as a service, which is preferred for an unattended server, or run as an application. Again, this will just need to be performed once. Finally, I'll check the Run Project icon to start running the project. When that's done, I'll close Studio on the Runtime or Production node. Please note that these last steps on the Production or Runtime node need only be performed initially and once. Any future updates will be deployed and then automatically applied from the Development node without any additional user interaction on the Production or Runtime node. After we deploy the project, we can run any report on the Production node. Before I do that though, I'm going to make changes on my report on the Development node, save the changes, and then redeploy the project to the Production node. I'll then switch over to my Runtime or Production VM one last time. I have to log into the RMC because the deployment took care of reloading the running project with the changes. Finally, I'll generate the pie charts report, and you'll see that the latest version of this project, with the color changes on this report, was automatically loaded after deployment. I want to reiterate the 3 golden rules of remote or concurrent development. First, whenever opening Dream Report Studio, make sure to first update from repository. This ensures you're always working with the latest updates of your project. With concurrent development, you must implement user management or project security to avoid any potential development conflicts. And finally, avoid using the same user login credentials simultaneously on different development nodes. So there you have the steps for a multi-developer implementation architecture and how to deploy Dream Report from a development or testbed node to a production runtime node. Thank you.